Marlene Okafor possessed $11.40 in her bank account on the morning of her son's 10th birthday. This was not $11.40 remaining after essential expenditures. It was the sum available before accounting for rent, utilities, the birthday celebration itself, the evening meal, and the fuel required to reach her night shift at the packing facility situated on West 5th Street in Gary, Indiana. All these demands rested precariously within that solitary monetary figure. Her son, having reached the milestone of 10 years, sat on the stoop of their apartment building, meticulously tying the laces of his sneakers with a double knot, the only knot that could still secure a pair of shoes he had worn for 3 years. The laces were not the originals, and the sole of the left shoe had developed an unevenness. He tied them with his characteristic care, unhurried, a manner that spoke of a responsibility far exceeding that of a typical 10-year-old. 3 years prior to that birthday morning, Marlene Okafor found herself in a discount shoe establishment on Michigan Avenue in Gary, clutching $31 in her purse with a 7-year-old boy newly embarked on 2nd grade by her side. She selected a pair of white sneakers from the clearance rack, priced at $24.99. Examining the tag, she then glanced at Isaiah's feet. She chose a size a full size and a half larger than he currently needed, not out of ignorance of his correct size, but from a calculated foresight regarding the longevity required of the next pair of footwear. She counted the bills in her hand, 20s, 5s, and 1s. Performing the calculation in her mind, as she invariably did, quietly, without revealing the underlying strain on her countenance, she arrived at the sum. $24.99 plus tax would leave just enough for bread, eggs, and bus fare extending to Wednesday. She purchased the shoes. Isaiah donned them immediately in the parking lot, not waiting for their arrival home. He sat on the curb, extracted them from the box, laced them, and stood. He surveyed his feet with the rapt attention children reserve for new possessions, as if the world had subtly tilted in his favor. Then he ran. 30 feet down the sidewalk he sprinted, veered, and returned. The soles of the shoes gleamed a stark white against the gray concrete. Marlene observed him from the car, clinging to that image as one holds on to something they intuitively sense will bear an undue burden. The shoes were intended to last 2 years. That was the original projection. They would, in fact, last 3. This she did not yet know. Isaiah's father, a man named Okafor, had resided in their apartment on Polk Street until Isaiah was 5. Then, one Tuesday, he was simply no longer there. There was no argument, no slamming door, no packed luggage left in the hallway. He simply did not return home. Wednesday passed, and he still did not appear. By Thursday, Marlene had attempted to contact him 11 times. By the following Monday, she had ceased calling. She informed Isaiah that his father was working in a distant location, stating it plainly, as one does with children, when an acceptance is required without full comprehension. Isaiah inquired about him 3 more times over the subsequent 2 months. Each time, Marlene offered the identical response, working far away. Eventually, he stopped asking. She recognized the precise moment of his understanding, not through his words, but through his newfound habit of folding his own clothes. At 5 years old, he stood on a step stool before the dresser, meticulously folding his shirts into small, neat squares with a precision that no child of that age acquires naturally. This carefulness indicated a decision made independently, a recognition that the household now required an additional set of helping hands, and his must be among them. She observed this from the hallway, refraining from interruption or outward display of emotion. She proceeded to the kitchen and prepared dinner. This had occurred 2 years before the purchase of the shoes. By the time she bought them, the apartment had settled into a consistent cadence. 1 income, 1 parent, 1 child who had mastered the art of deciphering silence as acutely as other children read picture books. His quietude suggested an awareness of matters no 7-year-old should be compelled to interpret. His alertness stemmed from an understanding of when rent was due, anticipating the arrival of the overdue notice. This awareness arose not from direct communication, but from the subtle hush that descended upon the kitchen on those days, and the almost imperceptible upward inflection in his mother's voice when she reassured him that all was well. Marlene watched him run back down the sidewalk in those new shoes, their pristine white contrasting with his every step, the soles flopping slightly at the heel, and she thought, 2 years, just hold on for 2 years. Then she started the car. She drove home. She prepared dinner. She commenced her work that night at 10 o'clock in the evening and returned at 6:30 the following morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. The shoes endured. Isaiah gradually grew into them by November. By the advent of spring, they fit him perfectly. By the following autumn, they were precisely his size, which presaged their becoming tight by winter, but that was a future concern. For the present, in that initial autumn, the shoes retained a semblance of newness, and Isaiah, still young enough to believe that a pair of clearance rack sneakers constituted a prize worthy of exertion, found joy in them. The first year unfolded with the relentless pace characteristic of singular parent households. It was neither swift nor sluggish, but simply unyielding. Marlene labored on the night shift at Harmon Packing on Industrial Drive from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, packing frozen meals into shipping crates beneath the incessant, high-frequency hum of fluorescent lights that she had long since ceased to perceive after the initial month. She returned home at 6:30, prepared breakfast, dressed Isaiah, escorted him to the bus stop at 7:45, returned, attended to domestic duties, and then slept from 8:30 until 2 p.m., provided sleep allowed itself, which it generally did, her body having transcended the need for permission and simply shutting down when an opportunity arose. She collected Isaiah at 3:15, prepared dinner, assisted with his homework, saw him to bed, and then sat at the kitchen table for an hour of quietude before dressing and repeating the cycle. Each day was a repetition of the previous one, subtly altered by circumstance. She did not conceptualize her efforts in terms of difficulty, but rather in terms of what came next, what was the immediate priority, and what task required completion in the ensuing hour to ensure the subsequent hour could also unfold. This was the operational logic, measured not in days, but in hours. Keisha Williams worked the same shift at the plant, on the same production line, under the same fluorescent hum, taking her break at 3 a.m. in the room containing a vending machine that only reliably dispensed change for dollar bills. Keisha, 37 years old, had 2 teenage children and a husband who was a long-haul truck driver, home only every 3rd week. She possessed the distinct demeanor of a woman who, years prior, had resolved that if no one else would voice the unvarnished truth, she would. They occupied the break room one night, using disposable paper cups, the coffee tasting as if prepared by someone who had received a description of coffee but had never actually experienced it. Keisha regarded Marlene and asked, "When's the last time you did something for yourself?" Marlene offered no immediate reply, taking a sip of her coffee. Keisha interpreted this silence as the answer. Marlene then stated, "I went to the store last week." Keisha clarified, "For Isaiah." Marlene countered, "Groceries count." Keisha looked at her with the particular patience of someone who recognizes the futility of extending the conversation further that evening, yet chooses to plant a seed nonetheless. She declared, "Marlene, groceries do not count." They returned to their respective stations. The topic was not revisited, but Keisha had spoken and Marlene had heard, and sometimes that is the genesis of change, not through immediate agreement, but through a statement that lodges itself in the mind, awaiting its moment. Isaiah grew. The shoes persisted. He never voiced a complaint about anything, not the early mornings, not the dinners that sometimes consisted solely of rice and whatever sauce was on sale, not the apartment that grew frigid in January when the heating system cycled off between 2 and 5 a.m. He completed his homework at the kitchen table. He placed his plate in the sink. He articulated "please" and "thank you" and "yes, ma'am," with a cadence that suggested these phrases had been imbued with significance for him before he was capable of independent discernment. One afternoon in late October, Marlene returned home to find his shoes placed by the front door. It had rained that day. The shoes were damp. Adjacent to them lay a neatly folded, moist washcloth. He had cleaned them. He was 7 years old. Marlene stood in the doorway, observing the shoes and the cloth, and uttered no word. She set down her bag. She prepared dinner. She departed for work. Certain things require no verbalization. They simply demand to be witnessed. Lorna Jeffries resided directly below Marlene on the second floor of the building on Polk Street. She was 74 years old and had been a home economics teacher at Roosevelt High School in Gary for 35 years before her retirement. Her husband, Calvin, had passed away 6 years prior. Her son, Raymond, lived in Atlanta with his wife and called every Sunday at noon. While Lorna appreciated these calls, she recognized them as precisely enough contact to assuage his conscience without necessitating any substantial alteration to his routine. She harbored no resentment towards him, understanding the intricate dynamics of adult children and aging parents. She had observed this pattern unfold in countless other families over decades. She simply noted it and moved on. Lorna became aware of Marlene's daily schedule before she even knew Marlene's name. She heard the footsteps above her each morning at 6:30, the opening of the front door, the descent of the stairs, the measured tread of someone carrying weariness like others carry groceries, their arms laden, striving not to falter. This was followed by the sound of running water, and then, 20 minutes later, a lighter set of footsteps, a child awakening. Lorna had encountered this rhythm before, in parent-teacher conferences, in hallway exchanges, and in the break rooms of schools where mothers appeared in their work uniforms from overnight shifts. She recognized the auditory signature of a household sustained by a single individual. She had heard it hundreds of times over her 35 years of teaching. The sound remained remarkably consistent. One afternoon in November, Marlene's bus was delayed, a full 20 minutes late. Isaiah sat on the front steps of the building, his backpack resting on his lap, waiting. He exhibited no signs of restlessness, nor did he scan his surroundings. He sat with a stillness that suggested this was not an unprecedented situation and that he had learned to wait without succumbing to frustration. Lorna opened her door and approached the steps, settling beside him without a word. She then returned inside and reappeared with a glass of orange juice, placing it beside him. He looked at the juice, then at her, and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Lorna regarded him for a moment longer than might be considered casual. She remarked, "You have excellent manners. That indicates someone is performing a difficult task commendably." Isaiah took a sip, not directly responding to the compliment, but rather continuing to drink the juice while awaiting his mother's arrival. When Marlene finally appeared, breathless and already offering apologies before reaching the steps, Lorna remained seated. She then stood and introduced herself. "I'm Lorna. I live directly below you." Marlene regarded her with the guarded apprehension she typically reserved for unexpected encounters, not out of rudeness, but from a place of careful assessment. This measured response stemmed from years of solitary responsibility and the learned understanding that most offers of assistance often carried a hidden cost or an unsolicited opinion, or both. Lorna perceived this. She did not press the issue, simply stating, "I'm downstairs if you ever need anything, or if you don't need anything, sometimes that's better." Marlene replied, "Thank you." She took Isaiah's hand and ascended the stairs. Lorna retreated into her apartment. She did not call on Marlene's door that week or the week following. She brought no food. She asked no questions. She waited. Her years as an educator had taught her that trust is not something to be offered. It is something the other person chooses to accept, and only when they feel ready. The second year marked the emergence of strains, not all at once, but in subtle increments, akin to a wall developing hairline fractures, each one so gradual that one might be tempted to believe it was the last. Isaiah was 8 years old in the 3rd grade. His feet had outgrown Marlene's projections. The shoes, which had initially been a size and a half too large, were now a half size too small. The sole of the left shoe had begun to wear down unevenly, tilting inward so that observing him from behind as he walked revealed a distinct lean. The rubber on the toe of the right shoe had started to detach from the canvas. Each morning, he pressed it back into place with his thumb. He did not mention this to anyone. At school during recess, a boy named Marcus commented on Isaiah's shoes. He said something, The script does not specify Marcus's remark, as Isaiah never repeated it. What transpired was this. Isaiah looked down at his shoes, then up. He walked to the other side of the playground. He did not run. He offered no verbal retort. He simply moved away, employing the calculated strategy of an 8-year-old who has already learned that the cost of engaging is greater than the cost of disengaging. Marlene's car malfunctioned on a Tuesday in March. The mechanic at 7th and Broadway estimated the transmission repair at $380. This was the amount required, or there would be no car. No car meant no viable means of reaching the plant on nights when the bus did not operate its late route, which occurred twice weekly. She paid the $380. That month, the electricity bill became overdue. A yellow notice arrived in a white envelope. She opened it at the kitchen table, read its contents, folded it, and placed it in the drawer before Isaiah's return from school. She would devise a solution, as she always did. This was not a statement of pride, but a factual acknowledgement of a burden that had become an intrinsic part of her existence. One night, at 2 a.m, Marlene sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a sheet of notebook paper. She was meticulously inscribing numbers. Electricity, $142 overdue. Rent due in 9 days. Groceries, $40 for the week, requiring extreme frugality. Gas, Isaiah's school supplies for the spring project, $12 she did not yet possess. She added, subtracted, and added again, attempting to coax a different outcome from a set of figures that consistently refused to yield one, a ritual she performed each month as if hoping for a mathematical anomaly. Isaiah stood in his doorway, unaware that she was present. He had been awakened by the faint scratching of the pen on paper, a sound that, like most noises, penetrated the thin walls of the apartment. He remained there for perhaps 2 minutes, observing her as she wrote numbers, crossed them out, and rewrote them. He did not understand the numerical values, but he knew his mother was awake at 2 a.m., and her shoulders were conveying that subtle tension they adopted when she was bearing an unspoken weight. He returned to his bed without uttering a word. He also remained silent the following morning. On Friday of that week, Marlene retrieved Isaiah's shoes from the mat by the front door. She turned them over, examining the soles. The left shoe's sole was nearly devoid of tread in the center. The toe of the right shoe was again separating, despite the adhesive he had applied. She held them, thinking, "I need to buy him new shoes." Then her gaze fell upon the notebook on the table, the one filled with numbers. The thought of the shoes receded. The following Saturday, as she tidied the living room, Isaiah entered from the front steps. She picked up the shoes he had left by the door. She turned the left one over, running her thumb across the sole. Isaiah watched her from across the room. He said, "They still work, Mom." She met his gaze. He stood by the couch, hands at his sides, his expression possessing a steadiness and awareness that belied his 8 years. She offered a smile, one that failed to reach her eyes, a smile intended solely to convey a semblance of well-being to the other person, a form of labor that never appeared on any ledger. She placed the shoes down and replied, "I know, baby." She went to the kitchen and began preparing dinner. Miss Terrell presented the assignment on a Tuesday in April. 3rd grade. A minimum of 5 sentences required. The prompt was inscribed on the board in green marker, "Write about someone you admire." Most children opted for athletes. A few wrote about their parents. One boy chose his dog, an allowance Miss Terrell granted, having learned over her 22 years of teaching that the most efficient way to extinguish a child's enthusiasm for writing was to critique their subject matter. Isaiah sat at his desk for a considerable duration before commencing. He paid no attention to the writing of his classmates. His gaze was fixed on the blank page. Then he picked up his pencil and wrote continuously. He submitted his work at the end of the period. Miss Terrell collected the papers and reviewed them that evening at her kitchen table, one by one, encountering the characteristic blend of concise sentences and profound emotions that 8-year-olds produce when prompted to articulate something meaningful. She reached Isaiah's paper near the bottom of the stack. Upon reading it, she paused. She reread it. He had written about his mother, not with the generalized superlatives typical of children's portrayals, such as nice or the best. He had detailed specific observations. He wrote, "My mom goes to work when it's still dark and comes home when it's still dark. I don't know when she sleeps." He noted that she prepared breakfast every morning, even when her hands trembled from fatigue. He described her checking his homework at the kitchen table, and how, at times, her eyes would close momentarily before reopening as she continued her task. Miss Terrell held the paper for some time. She did not assign a grade. She sent no note home. She did not contact Marlene. The next morning, she carefully folded the paper and placed it in the top drawer of her desk at school. It remained there for the remainder of the academic year. She never informed Isaiah that she had kept it. She confided in no one. Some items a teacher retains not because they know what to do with them, but because returning them to the general assortment would feel like a dereliction of duty. Isaiah submitted his paper, returned to his seat, and gazed out the window. The playground was visible. Other children were assembling for recess. He did not rise. He remained seated at his desk, hands clasped, watching the vacant swings sway gently in the breeze. He stayed there for the entire 20 minutes. Miss Terrell observed this. She did not urge him to go outside. She permitted him to remain seated. Marlene never learned of the paper. She remained unaware of what her son had written, or what he had observed, or the precise degree to which he had been watching her. She proceeded to her work that night, as she invariably did. She returned home the following morning, as she always did. The paper resided in a desk drawer in a school 4 miles away, and the boy who had written it tied his shoes, attended his classes, and spoke nothing of any of it. That same week, on a Thursday evening, Marlene did not manage to ascend the stairs. She arrived home from the plant at 6:40 a.m., 10 minutes later than usual, due to the shift supervisor holding the line for a pallet recount. She entered the building's front door, began ascending the staircase, and stopped on the landing between the first and second floors. She sat down, not by conscious choice, but because her body made the decision for her. She rested on the concrete step, resting her head against the wall, and closed her eyes. Lorna's door was 6 feet away. Lorna had been awake since 5. She heard the front door open. She heard the footsteps begin. She heard them cease. She waited 2 minutes, then opened her door. Marlene was seated on the step, her jacket still on, her bag on the floor beside her, her eyes closed. She was not asleep. She was merely immobile. Lorna did not ask, "Are you okay?" She did not inquire, "What's wrong?" She sat down on the step beside her. She remained silent for approximately 3 minutes. Then Lorna stated, "I taught home economics at Roosevelt for 35 years. Marlene opened her eyes but did not turn her head. Lorna continued, "Do you know how many single mothers I witnessed come through that school? Hundreds, perhaps more. Every single one of them believed she was the sole individual barely managing. Every single one of them was mistaken about that. They were all barely managing. That is what holding it together looks like." Marlene was silent. Lorna then said, "My mother worked for a family on the south side of Chicago in 1962. She cleaned their home, prepared their meals, and raised their children alongside her own, working 14 hours a day, 6 days a week." A pause ensued. Lorna explained, "The people who hired her had no idea of her last name. For 12 years, they addressed her solely by her first name, as if she were a piece of furniture that also happened to prepare roast beef." Marlene subtly shifted her gaze. Lorna continued, "My mother never voiced a single complaint. And when I reached an age where I could comprehend the sacrifices she made, I understood that her quiet demeanor wasn't a sign of inner fortitude. It was merely the only recourse the world afforded her." She met Marlene's eyes. Lorna stated, "The established structure isn't designed for individuals like yourself. I offer this not to deter you, but so that you cease blaming yourself for circumstances that were intentionally made arduous." The stairwell was hushed. Somewhere overhead, Isaiah's alarm would sound in 40 minutes. Marlene remained silent, offering no acknowledgement. She simply sat, and Lorna joined her. The quiet between them wasn't a void. It was the profound stillness that follows a truth spoken, allowing the listener to absorb its significance. After a pause, Lorna rose and said, "The same time tomorrow, if you wish, or not." Marlene replied, "Thank you, Mrs. Lorna." Lorna looked at her and clarified, "Just Lorna." She then returned indoors. Marlene lingered for another minute before standing, gathering her belongings and ascending the remaining steps. The third year marked a turning point when the shoes could no longer conceal their wear. Isaiah was 9 years old in 4th grade. The tear in the right sole had widened considerably, allowing him to feel the unforgiving pavement beneath on dry days and the chilling water on wet ones. Each morning, he would cut a piece of cardboard from a cereal box to match the shape of his foot and place it inside the shoe. By midday, it softened. By the close of the school day, it lay flat. He replaced this makeshift insole every 2 or 3 days, depending on the weather. He never spoke of it. The shoelaces had snapped twice. The first time, he managed to tie them. The second time, the knot failed to hold, so he salvaged a drawstring from an old hoodie and threaded it through the eyelets. It served its purpose, though imperfectly, yet sufficiently. The toe cap on the left shoe had detached entirely from the sole on one side. He discovered a tutorial online at the school library, demonstrating how to repair footwear using rubber cement. He purchased a small tube from the dollar store for $1.25. He completed the repair at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon while Marlene was asleep between her work shifts. She never witnessed him performing this task. The repaired shoe held together for an additional 3 months. Deshaun Avery organized a complimentary basketball program at Bethel Baptist Church every Saturday. He had been doing so for 6 years with no fees or registration requirements, offering only a gymnasium, some basketballs, and any children who arrived between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was 41 years old, had played for 2 years at a junior college in Indiana before a knee injury ended his athletic career, and had subsequently spent his working life as a city bus driver on the Route 17 line. The basketball program was not his livelihood. It was the element that made his daily job bearable. Isaiah began attending in September. He was reserved, as most new children are, lingering near the periphery, observing the older boys play, awaiting an invitation. Deshaun extended one on the second Saturday. Isaiah participated, exhibiting speed and keen instincts, moving effectively without the ball. However, Deshaun observed a subtle difference in the boy's movements. His maneuvers were less precise, his stops delayed, and he tended to slide during directional changes where other children would firmly plant their feet. Deshaun focused on Isaiah's footwear and noticed the worn soles, the drawstring laces, and the adhesive line on the left toe. He refrained from mentioning any of this to Isaiah. The following Monday, Deshaun contacted Marlene. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice already laced with anxiety. "Is Isaiah all right? Did something happen?" she inquired. Deshaun responded, "Nothing has occurred. Your son is among the most diligent youngsters I've encountered in my 6 years of running this program. I simply wanted you to be aware of that." After a brief silence, Marlene said, "Thank you." Her tone conveyed the gratitude of someone who had not received positive feedback about themselves or their child in a considerable period, unsure how to fully process it. Deshaun assured her that Isaiah was welcome every Saturday without exception. They concluded their conversation. He made no mention of the shoes. The subsequent Saturday, a cardboard box was placed in a corner of the gymnasium near the water fountain. A handwritten sign was affixed to its front. "Free shoes, all sizes, take what you need." Deshaun had positioned it there on Friday evening without prior announcement. He simply placed it and departed. Isaiah entered the gymnasium and noticed the box. He approached it slowly, his gaze falling inside. There were approximately 8 or 9 pairs of shoes, varying in size and color. A few appeared nearly new. He stood there for about 10 seconds, observing the footwear in the box, then glanced down at his own shoes, the cardboard insole, the makeshift laces, the glue on the toe. He then turned and walked towards the court, picked up a ball, and began shooting. He did not take a pair of shoes. Deshaun watched from the doorway, a quiet understanding dawning. It was the kind of comprehension that bypasses questions, stemming instead from recognizing a familiar pattern. It was the distinct pride of a child who had resolved that their current possessions were sufficient and that they would not accept anything that might imply a need for external rescue. It was the same pride Marlene carried with her each morning as she ascended the stairs at 6:30 in the morning. This unspoken understanding had been passed down without a single explicit conversation. That evening, as Marlene was folding laundry on the sofa, Isaiah emerged from the bathroom barefoot, his shoes placed by the front door. She looked at them. "Isaiah, do you need new shoes?" she asked. He met her gaze and replied, "They still work, Mom." His voice possessed a newfound steadiness, calmer than on previous occasions. It was not defensive, but rather settled, like the tone of someone who has repeated something so often that it has become a personal creed they have built their life around. Marlene regarded him for longer than intended. She almost spoke. She did not. She resumed folding laundry. 2 weeks into 4th grade, Mr. Hammond assigned the class a writing task. What is something you own that is important to you? The other students wrote about video games, bicycles, stuffed animals, or a baseball autographed by a relative. Isaiah wrote about his shoes. He did not express dissatisfaction with them, nor did he describe them as broken, old, or unattractive. He wrote that they were the last item his mother had purchased for him with evident joy. He recounted remembering the store, the parking lot, and the way she counted the money in her hand before making the payment. He wrote, "When my mom bought me these shoes, her smile was different, the kind of smile that reaches all the way." He explained that he cared for them because they represented a time when things felt as though they were going to be all right. After school, Mr. Hammond reviewed the papers. He remained at his desk for a while before locating Isaiah the next morning before first period. "Isaiah, may I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. Isaiah stood beside the desk. Mr. Hammond inquired, "Is everything all right at home?" Isaiah affirmed, "Yes, sir." Mr. Hammond's gaze drifted to Isaiah's shoes. Isaiah observed the look. Mr. Hammond's expression remained unchanged, but a subtle shift occurred behind his eyes, akin to a door closing when one approaches too near a private space. "They still work," Mr. Hammond stated. He registered the words, but also the unspoken sentiment beneath them. "Okay," he responded, making no further inquiry. That evening, at 11:30 p.m., Marlene's phone vibrated at the packing plant. She stepped away from the assembly line to check it. A voicemail from an unrecognized number. She listened to it during her break. It was Mr. Hammond's voice. "Miss Okafor, this is James Hammond, Isaiah's teacher. Nothing is amiss. Your son is not in any trouble. I simply wish to call and inform you that he is one of the most remarkable children I have ever had the privilege of teaching. That is all. Thank you." Marlene stood in the break room, the phone pressed to her ear. She played the message again. The identical sentiment expressed by Deshawn. A different man, a different setting, the same core message. Your son is remarkable. She had heard such praise before. However, standing in that break room at 11:30 at night, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, with 9 hours of packing work still ahead of her, the words resonated differently. She stood there for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you," to a voicemail that could not hear her. Her voice was softer than her usual tone. 2 days later, she shared the call with Lorna. They were on the stairwell again. It had become a familiar ritual by then, not daily, but frequent enough that neither of them pretended it was coincidental. Marlene mentioned, "Isaiah's teacher contacted me." Lorna asked, "What did he say?" Marlene replied, "That Isaiah is remarkable." She paused. "He probably assumes I can't even manage to buy my child shoes." Lorna looked at her and asked, "And what does your son think?" Marlene offered no response. Lorna then stated, "I taught for 35 years. Do you know what I observed? 2 types of children. Children who possessed everything yet couldn't articulate who was paying attention to them, and children who had very little but could pinpoint precisely who in their lives made an effort." She let her words settle before continuing, "Your son is fully aware of who you are. That is not something that can be purchased with money, nor is it a gift bestowed by a new pair of shoes. It is a testament to consistent presence day after day through hardship and exhaustion, even when faced with overwhelming challenges." Marlene's gaze was fixed on the wall. Lorna added, "Do you know what never makes the news? Do you know what events are never highlighted in headlines? A woman who works a night shift and still prepares breakfast in the morning. A woman who hasn't purchased a new shirt for herself in 2 years, but ensures her child's clothes are always clean. That kind of dedication is invisible within any established system. It goes unacknowledged. No one offers applause for it." She paused. A mother unable to afford new shoes faces judgment. A father in the same situation receives sympathy. I've witnessed this disparity play out for 35 years, and it remains unchanged. Marlene remained silent, her attention focused on her hands. Lorna continued, "You're not failing, Marlene. You're engaged in the most demanding form of labor with the most limited resources, and the outcome is a 9-year-old boy who writes about you as if you are the most significant person in existence, because to him you are." They sat in quiet contemplation. After a while, Lorna stood. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. Marlene responded, "Lorna." Lorna paused. Marlene inquired, "He truly wrote about me?" Lorna suggested, "You should ask him sometime." Marlene nodded slowly. She did not ask. Not that day, nor the next. But that night, after her shift, after breakfast, and after Isaiah departed for school, she stood in his room and observed him sleeping for an extended period, longer than she typically allowed herself. Subsequently, she retired for the night. 2 weeks prior to Isaiah's birthday, Marlene accepted additional shifts, working 3 double shifts within a single week. This entailed commencing her workday at 10 p.m., continuing until 6 a.m., sleeping for 3 hours, and then returning for the afternoon loading dock duties from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. before the subsequent night shift. She adhered to this demanding schedule on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. By Thursday, her hands trembled as she reached for coffee in the break room. She made no mention of it. She had a specific financial target in mind, $45. This was the cost of a pair of running shoes at the outlet store on Broadway. Not the most premium option, nor the least expensive, but a genuine pair, equipped with actual cushioning and laces that would not require replacement. They also featured a sole designed to provide appropriate grip on a basketball court. She had researched these shoes on her phone during a break 2 weeks prior, noting the size and price. She had meticulously calculated the expenses. 3 extra shifts at time and a half would enable her to accumulate the necessary funds by the Tuesday preceding his birthday. This was her carefully devised plan. The building's washing machine malfunctioned on a Monday. The landlord assured its repair by the end of the week. However, the week concluded and the machine remained unaddressed. Marlene began transporting their laundry to the laundromat on Ridge Road. The cost was $8 per load. She visited the laundromat twice that week, incurring $16 in unplanned expenses. Subsequently, Isaiah's school issued a list of required materials for the spring term, 2 workbooks and a folder. These items were priced at $22 at the bookstore adjacent to the campus. Marlene could have declined to purchase them immediately, informing the teacher that they would be acquired later. Instead, she bought them on Wednesday. Then Isaiah fell ill. He experienced 3 days of fever, a cough that disrupted his sleep, and a bottle of children's cold medicine from the pharmacy that cost $14 due to the unavailability of the generic version. The pharmacist explained that only the brand name option was in stock. Marlene purchased it without hesitation. She hesitated on all other expenditures. She never wavered when it concerned him. The initial $45 target was now reduced. $45 minus $16 minus $22 minus $14. The arithmetic no longer added up. She understood this on the bus ride home from the pharmacy, a comprehension that preceded verbal acknowledgement, characterized by a heaviness in her chest and a specific mental silence when the numbers ceased to align and she abandoned the effort to reconcile them. Kesha perceived it. Kesha always did. They were in the break room at 3 a.m., amidst the familiar paper cups and the customary quiet. Kesha offered, "Let me lend you some money." Marlene responded, "No." Kesha persisted. Marlene reiterated, "I said, no." Her voice was even, not angry, but firmly closed. The kind of closure that signals the door will remain shut for the night, and any attempt to force it open will only tighten the lock. Kesha did not push. She simply nodded. They returned to their tasks on the line. The following night, as Marlene opened her locker before commencing her shift, she discovered a white envelope resting atop her jacket. It bore no name and no accompanying note. She picked it up, feeling the bills contained within. She stood there for a moment, gazing at it. Then, she walked to Kesha's locker, placed the envelope on top of Kesha's bag, and proceeded to the line. Neither of them uttered a word about the incident. Not that night, not the following morning, and never thereafter. Some refusals stem not from pride, but from the defense of the sole remaining element that feels unequivocally theirs, an element they cannot relinquish, even when doing so would offer an easier path, because relinquishing it would equate to admitting the failure of a promise made to oneself. 10 days before the birthday, at 2 a.m., the apartment was enveloped in darkness. Marlene was in the kitchen. She was not seated at the table, but stood at the counter, her hands flat on the surface, her head bowed, her shoulders drawn inward in a posture that made her appear smaller than she was. She was crying, not with audible sobs, but with a silent internal weeping that seemed to pull the sound deep within her body, containing it there because the walls were thin. The bedroom was merely 12 feet away, and the boy in that room must not hear this. Her body shook. Her shoulders moved. Her mouth was agape, yet no sound escaped. The only audible evidence was her breathing, which she was actively attempting to control. Isaiah was awake. He had been for several minutes. He couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of his awakening, perhaps a sound, or the abrupt cessation of one. The apartment possessed a distinct nocturnal rhythm, and any deviation, however slight, registered with him. He stood in the doorway of his room, able to see into the kitchen. He observed her silhouette in the dim light, the curve of her back, the way her hands gripped the edge of the counter. He remained there for 4 minutes, not entering, not uttering, "Mom," making no sound. He simply witnessed the scene as a child might when they grasp a situation beyond their capacity to alter, and their only recourse is to observe without adding to its burden. He then retreated to his bed, pulling the blanket up. He lay with his eyes open for a considerable time. The following morning, Marlene prepared breakfast, eggs, toast, and a glass of juice. She was already dressed, her expression unreadable. Isaiah sat at the table and ate. "Thanks, Mom," he said. She replied, "You're welcome, baby." Everything appeared normal, precisely as it always did. Neither of them acknowledged the events of the previous night. Neither would. However, that afternoon, after school, Isaiah took a sheet of lined paper from his notebook. He sat at his desk and began to write. Then he erased it. He rewrote it, using different words. He erased those as well. He remained seated for a while, gazing at the blank paper, faint impressions of erased pencil marks still visible. He began writing again. This time, he did not erase. He folded the paper once, then twice, until it was small enough to fit into the front pocket of his jeans. He placed it there. He carried it to school the next day, and the day after that, and every day thereafter. That Saturday, as Isaiah entered the gymnasium at Bethel Baptist, Deshaun held a pair of sneakers in his hand. They were white, new, and the correct size. He had purchased them himself from the sporting goods store on Grant Street. He extended them towards Isaiah as the boy passed by. "Hey, Isaiah," he said. "My nephew outgrew these. They're just sitting in a closet. Do you want them?" Isaiah stopped. He looked at the shoes. He looked at Deshaun. He looked at the shoes again. They were clean and white, the laces perfectly tied, and the soles pristine. He could feel the cardboard insole shifting within his own shoes as he stood there. "Thank you, Coach," he replied. "But my mom's going to get me new ones." Deshaun regarded him, knowing the statement was untrue, yet he also recognized something else. He understood that the boy standing before him needed that declaration to be true more than he needed the shoes. The conviction that his mother would provide, that she always had, and that she always would, was foundational. It supported something vital that new shoes could not replace. Deshaun said, Okay, the offer stands if you change your mind. Isaiah responded, Yes, sir. He then turned, walked to the court, picked up a ball, and played for the subsequent 2 hours in shoes that slid on every cut and offered no grip during any stop. He remained the fastest player there. He still played with the most intensity, Deshawn observed from the sidelines. That evening he made a phone call, not to Marlene, but to Lorna. He had known Lorna for years. Gary was that kind of city, small enough that individuals who cared about others eventually found each other. You know Marlene Okafor? He asked. Lorna replied, I know her. Deshawn continued, That boy of hers. Lorna said, I know. After a brief pause, Deshawn explained, He turned down new shoes today, brand new, the right size. He looked at them as if they were precisely what he desired, and then he said no because he stated his mom was going to get him some. Lorna was silent for a moment before saying, That sounds about right. Deshawn inquired, He inherited that trait from her, didn't he? Lorna confirmed, Every bit of it. They made no specific plans, nor did they coordinate any actions. They simply understood, in the way people do when they have been observing the same narrative from different vantage points, that the family upstairs was carrying a significant burden with strength and resilience, and that the most appropriate course of action was to remain close without intrusion. 3 days before the birthday, after her night shift, Marlene sat at the kitchen table, her phone open to her bank account. The balance showed $11.40. She closed the app, then reopened it. The figure remained Elva Comafira. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a folded stack of bills, a $5 bill and 2 $1 bills, totaling $7. She placed them on the table next to her phone. The combined amount was $18.40. The shoes cost $45. She sat there contemplating the chasm between those two figures, akin to observing a gap that once seemed bridgeable, but now felt insurmountable. She thought of her mother. Her mother had passed away 4 years prior, 6 months after Derek departed. Cancer had been detected late because the insurance had not covered the scan that could have identified it earlier. Her mother had always managed to find a solution. When the rent was short, when the car broke down, when the school required funds for a trip, she had always devised a way. Marlene could sometimes hear her voice on difficult nights saying, Figure it out, baby. You always do. But now she sat at this table at 7 a.m. with $18.40, her son's 10th birthday just 3 days away, and no apparent solution. Her mother's voice was absent that night. Lorna knocked. Marlene did not answer immediately. Lorna knocked again. Marlene opened the door, holding a pan of cornbread wrapped in foil. Lorna did not offer a morning greeting. She did not inquire about Marlene's shift. She entered, placing the cornbread on the counter, and settled into the chair opposite Marlene. Her gaze drifted between the phone screen and the stack of bills on the table, remaining silent on the matter. They sat in shared quietude. After a stretch of time, Marlene spoke, her voice devoid of tears or outward emotion, a simple declaration of reality from someone exhausted by the effort to soften unpleasant truths. I can't even purchase new shoes for my son's birthday, Lorna. It was the first time she had voiced this hardship aloud, releasing the burden she had carried internally into the shared space of the room. Lorna offered no hurried response. She simply sat with the weight of Marlene's words. Then Lorna shared her own memory. When my husband passed, I couldn't afford any flowers for the funeral. 42 years we were married, and I couldn't even buy flowers for him. She paused, her voice softening. I went to the overgrown lot behind the church and gathered wildflowers, dandelions, Queen Anne's lace, whatever was growing. I placed them in a jar on his casket. Lorna looked at Marlene. And you know what? 3 decades later, I recall none of the floral arrangements anyone else brought. Not a single one. But I remember the ones I gathered because they were mine. They were what I possessed. Marlene remained silent, the kitchen enveloped in a profound quiet. The cornbread cooled on the counter. Beyond the confines of the room, a new morning was beginning to dawn, and Isaiah would be awake within the hour. The day's familiar routine poised to commence. For now, however, the stillness held its ground. The evening preceding Isaiah's birthday, Marlene had returned home on the bus from her final work shift. She occupied a window seat towards the rear, the one with the cracked armrest and a non-functional air vent. The city's dark expanse slid by. Streetlights blinked off, storefronts blurred, and the parking lot of the dollar store on Broadway passed in a silent procession. She observed it as the bus moved on, then pulled the cord to disembark. She entered the store, purchasing a box of cake mix, a small tub of butter, a carton of eggs, a bag of powdered sugar, and a candle shaped like the number 10. The total was $9.80 paid in cash. She was left with $8.60, her entire remaining funds designated for next week's gas. Arriving home at 6:15 in the morning, she found Isaiah still asleep. After setting her bag down and washing her hands, she opened the cake mix. The apartment's oven was notoriously uneven. It ran hot on the left side and cool on the right, a quirk she'd discovered over 3 years of preparing half-cooked reheated casseroles and frozen meals. She rotated the baking tray 3 times during the 25 minutes it took to bake. The cake emerged with a slightly scorched left edge. She carefully trimmed the burnt portion with a kitchen knife. She then combined the powdered sugar with butter and a small amount of water, whisking until it reached a spreadable consistency. The frosting, applied unevenly, dipped in the center where the cake had settled. She did her best to cover these imperfections. Locating a thin knife suitable for writing, she inscribed "Happy Birthday, Isaiah" into the frosting. The initial letters, H and A, appeared acceptable. The I, however, tilted precariously to the right. Her attempt to correct it only caused it to lean further. A subsequent effort worsened the situation. She stopped, setting the knife down. She stood contemplating the cake on the kitchen table, the askew I, the thin patches of frosting, the area where the burnt edge had been removed, distorting the cake's circular form. Beside it lay the candle, still encased in its plastic packaging. Her hands were dusted with flour. The oven continued its cooling clicks. A singular thought echoed in her mind. "This is all I have." She repeated it, the words resonating with a new depth, not as an apology or a confession of defeat, but as an irrefutable statement of her reality. "This is all I have, and I made it, and it is here, and tomorrow morning my son will see it. Will see." She washed her hands, turned off the kitchen light, and retired to bed. Isaiah awoke at 7:02. He lay in bed for a moment, as was his habit, his eyes open, listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment before stirring. He detected something in the kitchen, not a distinct noise, but an aroma, sugar and butter, with a subtle undertone of something slightly burnt, faint yet present. He rose and walked down the short hallway, his bare feet silent on the floor. His old shoes remained by the front door, just as he had left them the previous night. Rounding the corner into the kitchen, he stopped. A cake sat on the table. It was not a grand cake, nor a perfectly formed one. The frosting was thinner on one side than the other, and its shape was slightly irregular where a section had been trimmed. A candle shaped like the number 10 lay beside it, still in its protective plastic wrapper. Inscribed across the top in frosting were the words, "Happy Birthday, Isaiah." The letter I was tilted, leaning to the right, an indication of an attempt to rectify it, followed by a decision to leave it as it was. Adjacent to the cake was a handmade card fashioned from construction paper, the kind commonly found in the kitchen drawer. Marlene's familiar handwriting adorned the inside. There was no gift box, no wrapping paper, and certainly no new shoes. Marlene stood by the counter, having changed out of her work attire. She had washed her face and pulled her hair back, presenting her usual composed demeanor, projecting a sense of calm and presence despite having been awake for 26 hours and still faintly smelling of powdered sugar. "Happy birthday, baby," she said. Isaiah's gaze remained fixed on the cake. He studied it for a considerable time, his attention drawn to the tilted eye, the candle, and the uneven frosting. Marlene watched him, interpreting his prolonged silence as disappointment. She had braced herself for this reaction since placing the cake on the table 3 hours earlier. She began to speak. I know it's not much. I was going to get you something else, but things came up and Isaiah interrupted. You made this. She stopped. Yes, he inquired. By yourself? Yes, she confirmed. He stepped closer to the table and reached out, gently touching the frosting on the tilted eye with his fingertip. He traced the letter softly, as if reading it. Then, a smile spread across his face. This was the first time the narrative paused to describe his smile, not a polite or fleeting expression, but one that originated in his eyes before reaching his lips, a smile that built gradually, stemming from a place deeper than mere reflex. Can we eat it now? He asked. Marlene replied, It's 7 o'clock in the morning. Isaiah countered, It's my birthday. She looked at him, a short, surprised laugh escaping her. She retrieved a knife, cut 2 slices, and placed them on plates, mismatched ones, not part of the set she had acquired from the thrift store on 4th Street 3 years prior. She set them on the table. They sat opposite each other, sharing cake at 7 in the morning. The apartment was quiet. The light filtering through the kitchen window was the pale, early dawn kind, softening the edges of everything it touched. Isaiah ate his slice slowly. Marlene ate hers. A few minutes passed in comfortable silence, a quietude born of shared contentment in a small, perfect moment, neither wanting to be the first to break it. A knock sounded at the door. Marlene rose and opened it to find Lorna standing there, holding a small box wrapped in newspaper. I'm not staying, Lorna stated. I just wanted to bring this by. Come in, Lorna, Marlene invited. Lorna entered, her gaze falling upon the cake and then on Isaiah at the table, a fork with frosting in his hand. She sat down. Isaiah opened the box. Inside lay a book, old and well-loved, its spine softened and cover worn from repeated handling. It was a children's book, depicting a tree on its cover. Inside the front cover, in Lorna's neat handwriting, was an inscription, for Isaiah, who already knows what this book is about. Isaiah read the dedication, then looked at Lorna. Thank you, Mrs. Lorna, he said. You're welcome, sweetheart, Lorna replied. She did not linger long, enjoying a cup of coffee, remarking on the cake's delicious frosting, and then departed. The morning settled into its usual rhythm. That afternoon, Deshawn opened the gym at Bethel Baptist 2 hours earlier than scheduled. He had phoned Marlene the previous day, asking her to bring Isaiah by around 3 o'clock, mentioning he had something small. Upon their arrival, 6 children from the Saturday program were already present. A folding table near the wall held a cooler of sodas and a plate of cookies, baked that morning by Lorna and sent over with Deshawn's wife. There were no banners or balloons, just a gym, a basketball, a group of children, and enough sugar to make the afternoon feel distinct from all others. Isaiah played, wearing the same shoes he had for the past 3 years, the ones with the cardboard insole, drawstring laces, and glue reinforcing the left toe. He cut, stopped, planted his feet, and slid, yet he remained faster than anyone on the court. He scored 14 points in a pickup game, a score Deshawn was meticulously tracking, as he invariably did. Marlene sat on the bench outside the gym with Lorna. The spring sun offered a gentle warmth. They could hear the rhythmic bounce of the basketball through the open doors, the squeak of sneakers on concrete, and the excited shouts of children simply being children. Look at him, Lorna remarked. Marlene turned her gaze towards Isaiah. He was laughing, a genuine, full-bodied laugh. He had just stolen the ball from a boy significantly taller than himself and was driving towards the basket, his entire body leaning forward, his worn-out shoes miraculously holding together for one more decisive cut. He's not thinking about shoes right now, Lorna observed. I am, Marlene confessed. I know, Lorna replied softly. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lorna asked, Marlene, can I share something I learned over 35 years of observing children? Yes, Marlene agreed. Lorna continued, Children don't remember the gifts you buy them. They remember how you made them feel when you had nothing to buy. Marlene offered no verbal response, but her perception of Isaiah shifted. She noted the way he high-fived the boy he had just taken the ball from. She watched him pass the ball to the smallest child on the court, the one who hadn't yet scored, and then cheered when the child successfully made the shot. She observed him, running in those 3-year-old shoes, on the verge of falling apart, held together by glue and cardboard, a boy who refused to let them hinder him. As she watched, for the first time in a long while, she saw what everyone else had been seeing, not what was absent, but what was present. They arrived home at 6:30. Isaiah took a bath. Marlene cleaned the kitchen, washing the cake plates and storing the leftover cake in the refrigerator. She wiped down the counter, engaging in the ordinary end-of-day tasks, the small domestic routines that provide an unspoken foundation for a home. Isaiah emerged from the bathroom in his pajamas, his hair still damp. He walked into the living room and paused in the doorway. Marlene was at the sink, her back to him. He stood there, a small, folded piece of paper held close to his side in his right hand, the same paper he had carried in his pocket for 10 days. "Mom," he said. She turned around. "I have something for you," he announced. She dried her hands on a towel and looked at him. "Baby, it's your birthday." "You don't have to give me anything," she said. He walked to her and extended the paper. She took it and unfolded it. Inside, in the neat, careful handwriting of a 10-year-old boy, words written, erased, and rewritten until they were precisely as he intended, were 6 simple words: "Thank you for never giving up." Marlene read them, then read them again. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked at Isaiah, standing before her, with his hands at his sides, his gaze steady, the look of a child who had prepared for this moment and resolved not to cry. His eyes were dry, his chin level. He had practiced this. She attempted to speak, but her voice failed her. The sound that escaped was not a word, but the release of something held in place for 3 years by sheer willpower, routine, and the daily act of rising, working, preparing breakfast, and maintaining the illusion that the numbers would eventually balance. Finally, it let go. She wept, not the quiet, constrained crying of 2 in the morning with shoulders hunched and mouth sealed, but a full-bodied, open, uncontrolled outpouring. It was a cry that disregarded any audience, as caring was no longer an option. Isaiah stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her. His head rested on her shoulder. He was 10 years old. He held her. "I hear you at night sometimes when you think I'm sleeping," he said. Her crying intensified. Her hands gripped the back of his pajama shirt. She couldn't stop, nor did she try. "You don't have to buy me shoes, Mom," he continued. "You already gave me everything." The apartment was silent save for her weeping. The kitchen light remained on, as did the bathroom light from his bath. The hallway was dark. They stood in the living room at 8 o'clock in the evening, on his birthday, holding each other, motionless for a long time. The piece of paper, pressed against his back where her hands held him, remained in her grasp. 6 words, penned by a boy who had observed his mother's struggle for 3 years without ever revealing he was watching. Words written, erased, and rewritten over 10 days until each one perfectly conveyed his sentiment. Carried in his pocket to school, to the basketball court, back to the kitchen table, waiting for the opportune moment, which was now. Not because the moment was perfect, but because he had decided it was time. Outside, Gary was engaged in his typical weeknight activities: the hum of traffic on 5th Street, the distant rumble of a train on the freight line south of Broadway, the streetlight outside the apartment window casting its usual orange glow. Inside, a mother and her son, a piece of paper, 6 words, and the lingering light of the kitchen. The following morning, Marlene awoke early, not for her shift, which was scheduled for that evening, but because her body operated on its own ingrained rhythm. She lay in bed for a few minutes before rising and heading to the kitchen. She retrieved the paper from where she had placed it on the counter the previous night, alongside the card and the candle wrapper. Opening the junk drawer, she found a blue magnet from the dentist's office, which had resided there for 2 years. She affixed the paper to the refrigerator door, securing it with the magnet. Stepping back, she surveyed the 6 words in a 10-year-old's handwriting, held in place by a complimentary magnet on a second-hand refrigerator in an apartment on Polk Street in Gary, Indiana. She would see it every morning when she opened the door for the milk. Every single morning. She stood there for a while, then picked up her phone and dialed Keisha. It was 7:15 on a Saturday morning. Keisha answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Marlene, is everything okay?" she asked. "I'm okay," Marlene replied. "I just wanted someone to know that." Keisha was silent for a moment. "Good," she said. "Now say it again, like you mean it." Marlene laughed, a genuine laugh, the first the narrative had depicted that wasn't polite, guarded, or performative. "I mean it," she affirmed. "Then I believe you," Keisha responded. They spoke for 3 more minutes, their conversation covering inconsequential topics before hanging up. Marlene then went downstairs and knocked on Lorna's door. Lorna opened it, already dressed and with a cup of coffee in hand. Marlene stood in the doorway and recounted the events of the previous night. The paper, the 6 words, Isaiah's demeanor, his words. Lorna listened without interruption. When Marlene finished, Lorna offered no "I told you so" or "See, I knew it." Instead, she stated, "He's going to be fine." After a brief pause, she added, "And so are you." Marlene nodded and returned upstairs. That afternoon, Deshawn called. Isaiah answered. "Happy belated, young man," Deshawn greeted. "How was the birthday?" "Best birthday ever, coach," Isaiah replied. "Yeah? What'd you get?" Deshawn inquired. Isaiah was silent for a second. "I gave my mom something," he said. Deshawn didn't respond immediately. A pause stretched on the line, the kind that occurs when a grown man hears something unexpected from a 10-year-old. "That's a good birthday, kid," he finally said. They hung up. Deshawn remained in his living room for a while, contemplating. He didn't call Lorna or Marlene. He simply sat. Some things require a moment of reflection before one can comprehend their significance. 6 months later, Marlene received a permanent addition to her schedule at the plant. It wasn't a promotion or a change in title, but an extra 8 hours per week, officially documented on the board in the shift office, with her name listed permanently rather than on a rotating basis. It was enough. Not enough for comfort, but enough to cease the late-night calculations, enough to pay the electric bill on time, enough to look at the notebook on the kitchen table without feeling overwhelmed by the numbers. On a Saturday in October, she bought Isaiah new shoes. They cost $38 from the outlet store on Broadway, not the $45 pair she had considered 6 months prior. These were a different pair, dark blue, featuring genuine cushioning and laces that threaded through metal eyelets instead of fabric ones. She purchased his exact size, not a size and a half too large. She held the box on her lap for the entire bus ride home. Isaiah was at the kitchen table doing homework when she entered. She placed the box in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "Open it," she instructed. He lifted the lid and gazed at the shoes inside. For a moment he said nothing. He picked up one shoe, turned it over, and ran his thumb along the sole, a familiar gesture he had used countless times on his old shoes to check for wear and holes. There were none. The rubber was thick and clean, the tread deep, and the color uniform. He set it down. "These are for me," he stated. "Happy late birthday," she replied. He took both shoes out of the box and put them on. Standing up, he walked across the kitchen, turned, and walked back. The shoes fit perfectly. They didn't slide or lean. They gripped the floor as shoes are meant to, and the absence of the familiar wobble felt like something entirely new beneath his feet. He walked to the living room and back once more. Then he sat down and removed them, placing the new shoes on the floor. He then went to the front door and returned with his old ones. He set them side by side next to the new pair, 2 pairs of shoes on the kitchen floor. One was dark blue and pristine, with thick soles and metal eyelets. The other was gray-white, leaning precariously, its cardboard insole visible through a gap where the right sole had separated, its drawstring laces threaded through torn eyelets, a line of dried rubber cement along the left toe. Marlene looked at them. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Keeping them," Isaiah replied. "The old ones?" "Yeah." "Baby, they're falling apart." Isaiah looked at the old shoes on the floor for a long time before turning to his mother. "They got me here," he said. Marlene remained silent, her gaze fixed on the shoes. 3 years. Every morning. every walk to school, every Saturday at Bethel Baptist, every recess where he ran faster than anyone else on a sole with no grip left. Every night he wiped them down. Every morning he tied them with a double knot. Every time he cut a new piece of cardboard to fit inside. Every time someone offered him something else and he declined. She looked at those shoes, and for the first time she didn't see what she had failed to replace. She saw what had endured. She saw the glue he had applied himself from a tube he had purchased for $1.25. She saw the drawstring he had threaded through when the original laces broke. She noticed the cardboard sole, precisely shaped to his foot, replaced every 3 days. She witnessed 3 years of a young boy cherishing what he possessed because it originated from her. And standing in that kitchen, she grasped that the footwear had never been the true subject. Isaiah donned the new ones. "I'm off to show the coach," he declared. He departed. She heard his footsteps descending the stairs, then the front door opening, closing. She remained in the kitchen, alone. She retrieved the worn-out shoes. She held them for a moment. They felt almost weightless. The fabric had softened from 3 years of diligent washing, continuous wear, and repeated bending. She carried them to the shelf adjacent to the refrigerator. She placed them there beside a sheet of paper secured by a blue magnet, a pair of well-used shoes, and 6 carefully chosen words in a child's hand. She stepped back. She observed them together. 2 items that should have held no significance yet signified everything. There was no need for her to articulate the sentiment. It already permeated the room, residing in the shoes, on the paper, across the 3 years spanning from a discount rack on Michigan Avenue to this very kitchen on a crisp October afternoon. "They still serve their purpose, Mom," he had said. She moved to the sink and began washing the dishes. Sunday morning, midday. Lorna's phone chimed. It was her son, Raymond, calling from Atlanta. Their usual Sunday conversation. They exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, discussing the weather, his wife's new career, and the gutters on his house that required attention. Then a different voice joined the call. A voice smaller, more vibrant. Grandma Lorna smiled. "Hello, my darling," she cooed. Malik was 8 years old. He already possessed his father's vocal timbre, but his speech pattern was unmistakably Lorna's. "Grandma," he inquired, "are you feeling lonely?" Lorna sank into her armchair by the window. "No, sweetie, I'm not lonely." "But you live all by yourself," he pointed out. "I have neighbors," she replied. "What sort of neighbors?" Lorna glanced up at the ceiling. She could discern the rhythmic sounds of movement overhead, the pattern she had come to know over the past 3 years. The front door, the deliberate tread, the sound of running water, followed by lighter footsteps 20 minutes later. "There's a woman upstairs," she explained, "who works through the night and returns home each morning. She's raising her son on her own, and her son is truly one of the most remarkable young individuals I've ever encountered." She paused. On his birthday, he wrote her 6 words that would have moved your grandfather to tears. "What 6 words?" Malik asked. "Ask me when you're older," Lorna responded. "Grandma," Malik pleaded, "some stories require time to fully resonate, my dear. You'll understand that someday." Malik was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, but you must promise to tell me." "I will remember," Lorna assured him. They bid farewell. She placed the phone down. She settled back into her chair by the window. The apartment was hushed. The Sunday sunlight streamed through the glass, casting long, illuminated stripes across the floor. Above her, the familiar footsteps. 6:30 in the morning. Marlene had just returned from her night shift. The quiet click of the front door, followed by a steady pace, perhaps a fraction lighter than a year ago, or perhaps Lorna was merely imagining it, or perhaps it made no difference. The sound of water running. Then, 20 minutes later, the lighter footsteps. Isaiah was awake. The sounds of the kitchen. A cupboard opening. A plate being set down. Breakfast unfolding, just as it did every morning. Lorna listened. She had heard this cadence 1,000 times before, but now she perceived it differently. not merely as a sequence of events, but as evidence that somewhere above her, in a kitchen where a slightly askew letter adorned a shelf and 6 words were affixed to the refrigerator, the day was beginning, and it would begin anew tomorrow, and the day after that. She closed her eyes. She remained seated in her chair, listening. Marlene Okafor did not achieve immense wealth. Isaiah Okafor did not earn a scholarship to a prestigious university. The apartment on Polk Street remains precisely that apartment on Polk Street. The oven continues to generate significant heat on its left side. The bus invariably arrives late on Tuesdays. The old shoes are still present on the shelf. The piece of paper, held in place by a blue magnet from a dental practice, still adorns the refrigerator. Some would argue that 6 words on a scrap of paper effect no real change, that a child should not be burdened with what Isaiah endured, that a 10-year-old should not have to witness his mother through a doorway at 2 in the morning and independently conclude that the appropriate course of action is to refrain from requesting what he lacks, but rather to express gratitude for what she has provided, that a mother should not be forced to choose between purchasing shoes and paying for electricity in a nation possessing more affluence than any civilization in recorded human history. All of those points are undeniably true. However, there is this as well. A 10-year-old boy observed his mother's unwavering struggle for 3 years without a single respite. He watched her prepare breakfast after arduous overnight shifts. He saw her meticulously count money at the kitchen table, place letters into drawers, and force smiles when genuine joy was absent from her eyes. He bore witness to all of it. And on his birthday, rather than asking for something he didn't possess, he sat down with a pencil and a sheet of paper and penned the only gift he had to give. 6 words. Thank you for never giving up. Whether this narrative evokes heartache or solace in you is a personal reflection. If this account brought to mind someone in your life who never received those 6 words, consider sharing it with them. Subscribe for new stories delivered weekly. We look forward to seeing you in the next installment.